Have you ever found yourself maybe deep in an online forum or just chatting with friends, really wondering who truly holds the ultimate power in the vast, kind of tumultuous world of One Piece?
Oh, absolutely. It's the question, isn't it?
Is it the mighty four emperors? The Yonko, the ones who basically carve out their own empires in the New World?
Or is it the formidable admirals, the Daijang, the absolute pillars of the world government's military strength?
It's a question that sparked, countless debates, endless fan theories, and let's be real, some really passionate arguments everywhere in the fandom.
For a lot of fans, understanding this power dynamic is kind of central to the whole series.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take those complex, often really intensely debated topics, and we try to break them down into something digestible, give you some insightful knowledge.
And today, we are plunging headfirst into one of the most fiercely debated, longest-running, and most passionate discussions in the One Piece community.
We're talking about the Sade Nanjang, or as pretty much everyone knows it, the Yonko versus Admiral debate.
Yeah, and to really unpack this massive clash, we've pulled together a pretty incredible stack of sources. We've dug into fan discussions on Korean communities like Instiz, DC Onside, Namawiki.
We've looked at detailed analyses, YouTube discussions, the works.
Our mission for you today is basically to dissect all the arguments, the counter-arguments, and all those little hidden nuances of this power struggle.
We want you to walk away really understanding why this debate has raged for, over a decade now? And why it keeps pulling fans back in all over the world.
It's going to be a lively discussion laying out both sides, all the compelling evidence they bring up.
Okay, let's get into it. Let's unpack this thing.
So to really get to the heart of this, we need to be clear on who we're talking about, right? The combatants.
Yeah.
On one side, the Yonko, the four emperors. These are the four most powerful pirate captains out there, ruling over huge chunks of the New World.
They're like massive independent forces, emperors, basically. Their presence alone is a threat to the world government.
We're talking figures like Whitebeard, obviously, Kaido, Big Mom, Shanks. And now, more recently, Luffy and Blackbeard have stepped into those roles. They're the peak of pirate power.
And then on the other side, the Admirals, the Daijang. They represent the highest military power of the world government marine headquarters.
They are the absolute frontline elite. Officially, they're called the highest combat power of the Navy.
Historically, you've got three main admirals at a time. The lineup's changed. We're talking Kanu, Eikiji, Kizaru.
And the newer guys, Fujitora and Ryokugyu. They're the ones enforcing the world government's idea of justice.
Okay, so we have these two powerhouses. Why is this debate, the Yonko versus Admiral thing, so intense? Why does it just keep going?
Well, it's way more than just fans arguing about who'd win in a fight, First off, it has huge narrative importance.
Yeah, like Luffy himself says it, right? And Shinjao, too.
Exactly. They explicitly state that beating both Yonko and Admirals is crucial if you want to become the Pirate King. It positions them as these ultimate goals, these benchmarks of strength you have to overcome.
Douglas Bullitt, even though he's from a movie, kind of framed it as the way to surpass Roger.
Right. So the story itself sets them up as these twin peaks of power.
And that importance in the story just spills over into the fandom massively.
Oh, it's not just a casual chat. This is a deep historic argument. It's fueled blogs, forums like Chewing, which by now is almost entirely focused on this topic, and countless YouTube channels for more than 10 years.
Wow, over a decade. That's dedication.
It gets so intense that some fan communities, seriously, have had to ban or restrict talking about it just to stop fights breaking out.
No way. Really?
Yeah, it highlights how contentious it is, not just in Korea, but globally. Yonko versus Admiral is recognized everywhere. It's probably one of the most fiercely debated versus topics in all of anime fandom.
Okay, so narrative importance, intense fandom obsession. What else keeps this fire burning?
This is where it gets really interesting, and maybe why it never truly ends. There are hardly any direct, clear-cut fights between them in the manga.
Wait, really? With all this talk, you'd think they fight all the time.
Nope. Despite all the interest, the number of actual all-out confrontations between an active Yonko and an active Admiral, it's surprisingly small. Our sources count maybe 4 direct clashes.
Only 4.
Yeah, and maybe 5 other situations you could call combat-like. Think Marineford, Whitebeard against the Admirals, or Luffy versus Kizaru more recently at Egghead. Those are the big ones everyone points to.
So the lack of clear wins, that's the fuel.
Exactly. This scarcity of definitive victories leaves so much room for interpretation. Fans can endlessly pick apart ambiguous scenes, debate context, argue about motivations. It allows everyone to build a case for their side based on interpretation, not just hard facts. That ambiguity is the lifeblood of this debate.
It's like the ultimate puzzle for fans. Okay, let's tackle the first side then. The argument for Yonko superiority, the Emperor's reign supreme. What are the core pillars for this belief? What's the evidence?
It's fascinating. Proponents of Yonko supremacy really lean heavily on symbolic weight, individual power, and those really critical moments in the story. They argue the whole structure of the One Piece world, how these characters are portrayed. It all points to the Yonko being a step above.
Like those titles they have.
Exactly. Take the world's strongest titles. Whitebeard was known officially as the world's strongest man. Kaido, the world's strongest creature. These aren't just fan nicknames, they're in-world designations. That sets them apart immediately.
And compare that to the Admirals. They're the Marines' top power, sure, but they're still described as chief executives of the world government. They work for someone.
Right. Whereas the Yonko, they're independent rulers, like emperors. They command vast territories and fleets. It suggests a higher, you could say, class or status.
So it raises that question. Does rank within an organization equal ultimate individual power in a world like One Piece? Or does being an independent force put you on another level?
It's a key part of the argument. And then you look at Marineford, specifically Whitebeard's resilience.
Yeah, that's always brought up. He was sick, old.
Critically ill, weakened by age and disease, and he'd already taken that surprise hit from Squad. He was basically in a near-death state before he even started fighting seriously.
And yet,
he was shown to temporarily overwhelm Admiral Akainu. He literally punched him so hard he sent him underground, forcing Akainu out of the fight for a bit.
So the argument is, if a dying, massively injured Whitebeard could do that.
Imagine a healthy, prime Whitebeard. The implication is he would have been overwhelmingly powerful, maybe even dominating an admiral.
But you have to remember his goal there, right? It wasn't necessarily to beat the Admirals.
That's a crucial point the Yonko side makes. Whitebeard's main objective wasn't taking down the Admirals, it was saving Ace and protecting his crew. He had a limited goal and severe handicaps.
And even then, he fought Akainu pretty much to a standstill for moments and landed that massive counterattack.
Right, so it wasn't about winning the war for him in that moment, but demonstrating that even in that state, his individual power could push back, even briefly overwhelm, the Navy's strongest. It speaks to a different level of raw force.
Okay, so Whitebeard's resilience is one point. What about Shanks at the end of Marineford? That felt definitive.
Oh, absolutely. Shanks' arrival is maybe the cornerstone argument for Yonko supremacy for many. He shows up, says, if you want to fight any further, we'll be your opponents.
And the entire war just stops dead in its track.
Exactly. The admirals, the remaining warlords, even Blackbeard and his crew who just got a massive power-up. Nobody wanted to challenge it.
He specifically called out Kizaru too, didn't he? Put his sword to his attack.
He did. The fact that a single Yonko, just by showing up and stating his intent, could halt a full-scale war involving the Navy's absolute best, that's a massive point for the Yonko side. It shows a kind of authority and deterrent power that goes beyond just combat ability.
It's like political power almost, mixed with the threat of overwhelming force.
Precisely. And speaking of overwhelming force, we have to talk about Conqueror's Haki infusion. This is a more recent but really big point.
Right, the Hakaki coding. That seems to be the mark of the truly top-tier fighters lately.
Absolutely. It's been shown as an elite ability. We've seen Luffy use it, Kaido, Big Mom, Shanks, Roger, Whitebeard. These are the legends that absolute strongest.
And the key point here for the Yonko argument is,
crucially, no admiral has ever been explicitly shown using this advanced form of Haki coding, not once in the manga.
So that's seen as a clear dividing line between the Yonko tier and the Admiral tier.
For many fans, yes. It's presented as the benchmark for that absolute highest level of combat power, and so far only Yonko-level characters and Roger Rayleigh have definitively shown it.
And we saw that play out dramatically with Shanks versus Ryokugyu Green Bull.
Vividly. Shanks used his Conqueror's Haki from miles away, completely paralyzing Admiral Ryokugyu. Green Bull was utterly incapacitated, forced to retreat without Shanks even needing to be there physically.
That wasn't just pushing him back. That was like a complete shutdown, demonstrating a clear power gap through Halaki alone.
It really solidified the argument for many that Advanced Conqueror's Haki represents a level the Admirals haven't reached, or at least haven't shown.
Okay, beyond the big moments in the manga, what about hints from Oda himself? or even other related media.
Well, Oda is famously tight-lipped about direct power comparisons. He likes the ambiguity. But very rarely, in SBS Q&A corners, he might drop a tiny hint.
Like what?
There have been suggestions, for example, that Kaido would likely win in a pure one-on-one fight. Now, context is everything, and these are rare, often vague comments.
But fans definitely seize on them.
Oh, absolutely. They're interpreted as Oda subtly acknowledging the Yonko's individual might, and then you have things like One Piece Film Red.
Right, the movie. How does that factor in? Its canonicity is always debated.
True, but the director did state that the settings and character dynamics were meant to be canonical. And in that film, you see both Kizaru and Fujitora actively retreating when faced with Shanks' Conqueror's Haki.
So even if the plot isn't canon, that portrayal of the power dynamic reinforces the manga scenes, like Shanks versus Ryokugyu.
Exactly. It adds another piece of supporting evidence, even if it's from outside the core manga, that suggests admirals are wary of directly confronting Shanks Sasaki.
Okay, one last point often brought up. Bounties. How do they fit into the Yonko superiority argument?
It's pretty straightforward comparison usually. Yonko bounties, typically over 4 billion berries. Whitebeard and Roger were over 5 billion. Kaido, Big Mom, Shanks, Luffy, all incredibly high.
And the Admirals, what are their bounties stated as?
Organizations like Cross Guild have put bounties on Marines, and the Admirals are generally placed around the 3 billion berry mark.
So a noticeable gap. But bounties aren't just about strength, right? They include danger level, influence.
Correct. It's not a pure power level. But bounty amounts often correlate very strongly with the character's overall power and threat to the world government. The argument from the Yonko camp is that the consistently higher bounties reflect their superior individual strength and overall impact compared to the Admirals. That billion-plus difference isn't just noise.
It suggests a difference in tier, even if it's not a precise measurement. Okay, that's a really strong case for the Yonko side. You've got titles, status, Marineford feats, Shanks intervention, advanced Takoki, author hints, bounties. It's compelling.
No doubt about it.
But this debate wouldn't be a debate if there wasn't an equally passionate counter-argument. So let's flip the coin. How do the proponents of admiral equality, the guardians of the balance, see things? How do they counter all that?
Exactly, and this is where you really see the different interpretations come into play. The Admiral camp often zooms out, looking at the bigger picture. They emphasize the balance of power in the One Piece world, strategic thinking, and they offer different reads on those key battles. They argue that looking at just one moment, like Whitebeard hitting Akainu, is misleading.
So what's their foundational argument?
It starts with the 3 great powers. Remember that concept. The world's balance rested on Marine headquarters, the 7 warlords, and the 4 emperors.
Right. The whole system depended on those 3 roughly balancing each other out.
Precisely. The argument is if one Yonko could genuinely defeat all 3 admirals single-handedly, that balance couldn't exist. The system would collapse. The Yonko would just run rampant.
So the world stability itself implies a rough parity between the combined Yonko and the combined Navy warlords, meaning the admirals have to be individually strong enough to contribute significantly to that balance.
Yes. And it connects to the Navy's strategic goals. Their main job isn't necessarily wiping out every Yonko crew that would cause unimaginable chaos. It's about maintaining global peace and order.
Like Garp said, if blood doesn't flow, I call that peace. Avoid unnecessary conflict.
Right. So not attacking a Yonko head-on unless absolutely necessary isn't a sign of weakness, it's strategic prudence. They pick their battles carefully to avoid destabilizing the entire world. The admirals operate within that framework.
Okay, that makes sense strategically.
Yeah.
How does this apply to Marineford, then? The Yonko side uses Whitebeard's feats, but the admiral side points to
The outcome. Plain and simple. Despite Whitebeard's power, Marineford ended with the deaths of both Whitebeard and Ace. That's a decisive victory for the Navy by any measure.
They achieved their primary objectives.
They did. And furthermore, the Admiral camp argues the Navy wasn't even going all out. You had figures like Garp and Sengoku Legends who fought Roger mostly on the sidelines.
Right. They weren't fully engaged in the fighting for large parts of it.
And many warlords were either holding back, fighting each other, or even actively working against the Navy, like Hancock. The argument is the Navy could have brought even more power to bear if needed.
So even with Whitebeard's moments, the Navy won and potentially could have won even more decisively.
That's the perspective. And look at Akainu. Yes, Whitebeard stunned him, but Akainu got back up, delivered fatal blows to Whitebeard later, and kept fighting against multiple Whitebeard commanders like Jinbei and Ivankov, nearly killing Luffy too.
His resilience is seen as proof of admiral-level durability, not weakness.
Exactly. He took a massive hit from the world's strongest man, albeit weakened, and kept going, ultimately contributing significantly to the Navy's victory.
Okay, Marineford is complex. What about that duel between Akainu and Aokiji? That seems like a huge point for the admirals.
It's arguably one of their strongest pieces of evidence. That 10-day battle for the fleet admiral position, it was insane.
It permanently changed the climate of Punk Hazard.
Yeah.
Half ice, half magma.
Exactly. It showcases the immense power, endurance, and destructive capability of two admirals going all out against each other. If they can fight for 10 days with that kind of impact, it proves they aren't easily defeated, even by the absolute strongest opponents.
And the fight was supposedly incredibly close, right? Like a mere sheet of paper between them.
Yeah, suggesting top admirals are very close in power, pushing towards that fleet admiral level. It demonstrates their incredible stamina and power ceiling when truly pushed.
That duel definitely paints a picture of immense admiral strength. Let's jump to recent events. Luffy, now a Yonko, versus Kizaru at Egghead. The Yonko side says Luffy took him down. What's the admiral counter?
It's all about the context and the aftermath. Yes, Luffy in Gear 5 landed a powerful blow that took Kizaru down temporarily, but Luffy also collapsed immediately afterwards from the strain of Gear 5.
The mutual knockout argument, or at least both fighters going down.
Right, or maybe even a slight edge to Kizaru, because Kizaru actually got up faster than Luffy and was ready to continue his mission, while Luffy needed recovery time and food.
So it wasn't a clean win for Luffy at all? It showed Kizaru could push a Yonko using his ultimate form to the point of simultaneous collapse.
That's the interpretation. It demonstrates an admiral can absolutely fight a Yonko to their limits, even if they don't get the final win in that specific exchange.
And there's also the argument about Kizaru's motivations, isn't there? That he wasn't fully committed to beating Luffy.
Yeah, that's a big part of it too. Some fans argue Kizaru was conflicted due to his connection with Vegapunk and Sentomaru. His mission was primarily about Vegapunk. He even secretly gave Luffy food later,
Suggesting his focus wasn't 100% on destroying Luffy, potentially holding back his full killing intent or power.
Exactly. So, from this viewpoint, Egghead doesn't prove Yonko's superiority. It shows an admiral achieving his objectives while pushing a Yonko to his limit, possibly without even going all out himself.
Okay, that adds layers. Now let's revisit Ryokugyu's retreat from Shanks. Yonko side sees it as clear Hashian dominance. How does the admiral side explain that?
Context, context, context. They argue it wasn't a simple 1v1 power check. Ryokugyu was completely alone, deep in enemy territory, Wano.
Right, he wasn't just facing Shanks' Hiki, he was potentially facing Shanks' crew, plus Luffy's crew, the Wano Samurai, Yamato.
An overwhelming force. Ryokugyu himself says, "I don't want to fight you guys yet." The yet is key. It implies a strategic decision to withdraw from an unwinnable situation against multiple powerful groups, not necessarily admitting individual inferiority to Shanks in a vacuum.
It was a tactical retreat, not fleeing in terror from one person.
That's the argument. And to bolster Ryokugyu's individual strength, they point to what he did before Shanks showed up, or perhaps shortly after leaving Wano, depending on timeline interpretation.
Capturing Weevil.
Yes. He single-handedly defeated and captured Edward Weevil, a character who is explicitly compared in strength to a young Whitebeard. Taking down someone with that level of physical power shows Ryokugyu is no pushover. It demonstrates his own significant combat prowess.
So his retreat from Shanks was situational, not indicative of his overall power level against a single opponent.
That's the core of their counter-argument there. Finally, the Admiral camp emphasizes their unique strengths and role.
Like their devil fruits.
Definitely. Admirals often have incredibly powerful Logia fruits. Akainu's magma, Kizaru's light, Aokiji's ice, or devastating paramecia like Fujitora's gravity. These grant them massive area of effect, natural disaster-level abilities that are hard to counter.
And they're part of a huge organization.
Unlike the Yonko, who are essentially independent warlords, the admirals command the resources of the world government and the Marines. They have access to pacifistas, the SSG's new weapons, global intelligence networks.
They're the spear and shield of the world's largest military power.
Exactly. They're the primary enforcers, constantly dealing with major threats. So this raises that question again. Is it just about raw individual power in a 1v1 fight, or does the backing of a massive organization and their specific, often strategic roles give them a different kind of strength that balances out the Yonko's individual might? It's individual empires versus the elite of a global superpower.
Wow. Okay, hearing both sides laid out like that, you can really see why this debate is so fierce and never seems to end. We've got compelling arguments, manga evidence, different interpretations for both Yonko superiority and Admiral equality.
It's a genuine clash of perspectives, deeply rooted in the text, but also fueled by interpretation.
So why is it so hard to just settle it?
Hmm.
What is it about One Piece itself and this specific debate, the Sade Nanjing, that makes a definitive conclusion feel almost impossible for you, the listener?
Yeah, that's the crux of it, isn't it? If you really connect it all, it comes down to some inherent things about how Oda tells his story and how fandoms engage with power scaling in these long, epic mangas. It's not just about who hits harder, it's about the storytelling itself.
And a big part of that is Oda's intent, or lack thereof, regarding clear power levels, right?
Absolutely. Oda prioritizes narrative drama, character moments, and thematic resonance way over creating a rigid, quantifiable power scale like you might see in, say, a video game.
He deliberately keeps things ambiguous.
To maintain tension, surprise. Exactly. If you always knew exactly who was stronger, where's the drama in the fight? He rarely gives explicit statements comparing top tiers directly. Those moments are like gold dust when they happen.
So most of it is left to us, the fans, to interpret and piece together, like a giant puzzle with missing pieces.
Precisely. And that ambiguity is fertile ground for debate. Then you add in the power inflation and fluctuating power levels.
Ah, yes, the infamous One Piece power creep. What's strong in one arc might seem less impressive later on.
For sure. Look at the warlords. Their perceived strength has shifted dramatically over the series. Crocodile seemed unbeatable early on, then later. Well, his standing changed.
And even Luffy himself isn't always consistent, is he? Sometimes he tanks hits he maybe shouldn't, other times he struggles unexpectedly.
Right. Oda himself admitted back in 2012 that he often puts brakes on Luffy, holds him back narratively to prolong the story and make challenges feel real. Fans point to recent arcs where Luffy maybe wasn't consistently using his most advanced Tobakaki when it seemed logical.
Which makes it really hard to establish a consistent benchmark. If the main character's power fluctuates for plot reasons, how can you reliably compare anyone else?
It's like trying to measure something with a ruler that keeps changing length. Very difficult.
And compounding that is the lack of those clean, definitive fights we talked about earlier.
Exactly. Those few Yonko versus Admiral clashes, they're always complicated by context. Whitebeard was sick. Kizaru seemed conflicted and had other goals. They were never straightforward 100% power versus 100% power duels.
So most arguments rely on indirect comparisons, like character A beat character B, and character C fought evenly with character B, so A must be stronger than C.
Yeah, a lot of ABC logic, which is notoriously unreliable in fiction, especially One Piece, where matchups and circumstances matter so much.
The power system itself also adds to the confusion, doesn't it?
No.
Hakuraki and devil suits are cool, but not exactly scientific.
Not at all. There are no clear mana bars or energy costs. Haki can sometimes seem limitless. Other times it gets depleted or overwhelmed if the plot needs it to. Devil Fruit Awakenings add another layer of complexity that isn't fully explained.
It's more flexible for storytelling, but a nightmare for power scalers trying to find consistent rules.
Right. And fans often confuse different types of Haki themselves, like Advanced Conqueror's coding versus Internal Destruction, Advanced Armament. The system is complex and sometimes intentionally vague.
And then there's the fandom itself. Bias plays a huge role here, right?
Oh, massively. Like any big versus debate, people tend to pick a side, often based on characters they like more, and then look for evidence to support their view. Confirmation bias is rampant.
You mentioned those terms, Yonko bugs and Admiral germs.
Yeah, those emerged in Korean fan communities to describe the really hardcore, sometimes irrational partisans on each side. It shows how heated it gets. People get really invested.
And this bias leads to using questionable evidence sometimes.
Definitely. People might misinterpret setting books or data books, which often hype characters up beyond their manga feats, or they bring in non-canon movie moments as definitive proof.
Like Kizaru's feats in Film Z or Red being treated as pure manga canon.
Exactly. Or even simple mistranslations getting passed around as fact, changing the meaning of a character's statement about Haki or power. And the bounty system is constantly misinterpreted, treating it as a pure strength ranking, when it clearly includes threat level and is calculated differently for Marines versus pirates.
So you have ambiguity from the author, fluctuating power levels, lack of clear fights, a complex power system, and intense fandom bias all mixing together.
It's the perfect storm for a debate that literally never ends. Each factor feeds the others, creating this perpetual motion machine of argument.
It's also unique because it's group versus group, right? Not just character X versus character Y.
That's a great point. It's Yonko as a category versus Admirals as a category. But neither group is monolithic. You've got multiple Yonko, multiple Admirals, all with different strengths, weaknesses, and feats. Comparing the averages is tricky, and comparing the peak of one group to the perceived weakest of the other isn't fair either.
Like comparing Kaido to maybe Ryukugyu versus comparing Buggy to Akainu. Very different discussions.
Precisely. The internal variation within each group makes a simple Yonko versus Admiral statement almost meaningless without specifying who you're talking about.
So, after going through all of that, the arguments for each side, why the debate is so complex and never ends, what's the most reasonable takeaway for you, the listener, when you encounter this debate? Is there a correct stance?
Well, this leads us to what you might call the unknown perspective. And honestly, it might be the most rational approach right now.
Which argues?
Basically, that making a blanket statement like Yonko are stronger than Admirals or vice versa is pretty meaningless given all the variables. Individual differences between characters, the specific situation of a fight, and the sheer number of unknowns make a definitive answer impossible.
It acknowledges the complexity. Like we said, there are over 10 distinct Yonko and Admiral characters we could compare. Each has unique powers, fighting styles, strengths, weaknesses.
Right. Kizaru's speed and lasers versus Akainu's overwhelming destructive power versus Akiji's battlefield control versus Fujitora's gravity. They're all top tier, but they fight differently. How they match up against Kaido's durability or Shanks' haki or Luffy's Gear 5 would vary hugely.
Comparing the groups ignores the nuances of the individuals within them.
Exactly. And the situational context is everything in One Piece fights. Who has backup? What's the terrain? What are their motivations? Is someone injured or holding back for plot reasons, like Whitebeard at Marineford or maybe Kizaru at Egghead?
All these things can swing a fight, regardless of some theoretical base power level.
Absolutely. So the unknown perspective basically says it depends. It depends on the specific characters, the specific situation, and frankly, what the plot needs to happen.
So the most honest answer, for now at least, is simply, we don't actually know for sure.
Pretty much. Until Oda gives us either a clear, definitive statement ranking them, or we see unambiguous, full-power, no-holds-barred fights between multiple Yonko and Admirals with no external factors. Anything else is just a well-argued hypothesis.
The story needs that tension, that uncertainty about who the absolute strongest are to keep us hooked, right?
It's part of the narrative engine. The mystery fuels the journey. It's not about spreadsheets. It's about the drama of the encounter.
Okay, that feels like a good place to land. We have taken a really deep dive into the Seidei Nanjang, the Yonko versus Admiral debate. We've explored the passionate arguments for both sides.
From Whitebeard's incredible resilience and Shanks' sheer happy presence for the Yonko.
To the Navy's strategic balance argument, the Admiral's insane endurance shown by Kainu and Aokiji, and Kizaru's performance at Egghead for their side.
Both camps have strong points, backed up by moments in the manga, even if those moments are interpreted differently.
It really shows how rich and layered One Piece is, that it can sustain this kind of intense debate for so long across the entire global fandom.
Absolutely. The fact that we can debate it so fiercely is a testament to the depth Oda has built into this world and its power structures.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? It means the strength of One Piece isn't just in the amazing world, the epic story, the characters you love. It's also in these vibrant, ongoing discussions it creates.
That ambiguity we talked about, it isn't really a flaw in the storytelling. You could argue it's a feature. It keeps the community alive, thinking, talking, theorizing.
And here's a final thought for you to mull over as we wrap up. As One Piece heads into its final saga, will the line between these two immense powers blur even more? Will we see Admirals taking down Yonko, or Yonko definitively overpowering multiple Admirals? Or will a clear answer finally emerge?
Or maybe, just maybe, the story will suggest that true strength isn't just about who wins a fistfight. Maybe it's about the ability to change the world, whether that's through brute force, clever strategy, sheer willpower, or inspiring others. Perhaps the ultimate power isn't Yonko or Admiral, but something else entirely.
What do you think is the most compelling argument in this whole debate, and why? Does one side convince you more than the other, or are you in the it depends camp?
Keep thinking about it, keep debating it. That's half the fun.
Join us next time for another deep dive into the fascinating complexities of the world around us.